Hello, everybody. My name is Dratnos, and today we're going to take a look at the release schedule that has been announced for the raids at the start of Midnight Season 1. And then also a bunch of other various Wowhead posts and news and things, including some patch notes, where I've missed a couple of weeks of in-depth patch notes, and I'm not going to do a full in-depth patch note this time, but there are some big changes coming to some of the specs that are from the previous builds. Fire Mage in particular, I think getting a really needed heroic change to how that works. But we're going to start off with the release schedule and with the Race to World First implications. I know there's a lot of people that aren't interested in that, but for me, that's the biggest, most interesting thing of the past couple days. So it's the thing I want to talk about the most. So I'm putting it at the start of the video. But if you want to skip past that, feel free to use the channel, not the channel things, the chapters down below. So Midnight arrives on March 2nd. Although early access is 3 days before that, bringing 3 raids, new dungeons, fresh PvP. Here's the release schedule. So the week of March 17th, so basically 3 weeks after or 2.5 weeks after the early access has started, 3 weeks-ish in that range, we get the first opening of Midnight Season 1 actual content. Before then, there are the non-bountiful delves and the normal difficulty dungeons. But week of March 17th is when we are getting Raid Finder, Normal, and Heroic for Voidspire and Dreamrift. So Voidspire is the 6-boss raid, which is sort of average difficulty with maybe the end boss chopped off. The last boss of Voidspire being somewhere along that maybe second to last boss, maybe even a little bit easier than the hard second to last bosses. The exact difficulty is still... There's been some different information that Blizzard's put out about it, but it seems like it's sort of aimed to be that. So you could think of this as maybe bosses 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 7 of the raid, something like that, of the overall tier. And then Dreamrift is something like that boss 5 range, although when we say boss 5, obviously there's been bosses of massively different difficulty that have been placed in that spot in a raid. So it could be as hard as, a Forge Weaver, a Styx, a One-Armed Bandit, right? Or it could be as easy as a Rashanan, one of those bosses that sort of just falls over in that spot. So we don't know yet. My suspicion is it will be a hard mid-boss, a mid-tier boss, rather than an easy one on Mythic. But of course, sometimes the Mythic difficulty, the relative Mythic difficulty of bosses can vary wildly from how they feel on the lower difficulties, and those are the only ones that will be available on week 17, or on the week of March 17. So we're going to have 7 bosses available on Normal and Heroic. We're going to have probably 3 or 4 available on Raid Finder. And then we're also going to get Heroic and Mythic, but not Mythic Plus, for the Season 1 dungeons. So a Mythic 0 World Tour will be available to do on all your characters if you want. If you're somebody who has multiple characters. My assumption here as well is these are going to be on a weekly lockout, at least Mythic. I don't know about Heroic. Sometimes what they've done in the past, and they haven't specified here, sometimes Heroic is on a weekly lockout just for this week, and then it moves to being on a daily lockout. And the same with Mythic as well. Sometimes this happens, is it moves to that daily lockout on future weeks. But I think Mythic typically stays on the weekly lockout. Sometimes Heroic is only briefly on the Heroic lockout, or on the weekly lockout. We don't know that for sure, though, yet, how that's going to look. Then PvP season starts, although the way that PvP gear is time-gated is typically that you need a couple of weeks of capping conquest, and then you get your weapon sort of for free for reaching, the 3rd week's worth of a full conquest cap, or the 4th, something like that. You get a weapon for free, and then you're also buying all the conquest stuff. Again, typically not something that's super relevant for PvE players, although often, especially if there is full conquest gear available, often something like socketed PvP bracers, socketed PvP belt, those kinds of things tend to be upgrades, especially because you can farm them during this week. And this week, you're maybe not going to have a full schedule of PvE stuff to do if you play a lot of PvE. And then, Bountiful Delves will be out, so that will be also potentially a relevant source of gear, especially on that first week, although falling off on the week of the 24th if you're somebody who can do the Mythic difficulties. So Voidspire is going to get its story mode, which story mode is typically just the last boss, Raid Finder Wing 2, and then also Mythic for Voidspire. And then Mythic is also coming out for Dreamrift. So bosses 1 through 7 of the combined tier are now available. And then 2 of the 3 Voidspire Raid Finder wings, so maybe there'll be 2 per wing, will be also available on that week. And then Season 1 of M Plus opens up. And there's no Keystone level cap in some previous expansions, what they would do is they would open up Mythic Plus on the Heroic Week with a cap to, you know, the level that a key would give better rewards. So if you did up to a +6, you got good rewards, and then beyond a +6, the cap, it basically didn't give better rewards until the Mythic Week. That's something that they've moved away from and are continuing to move away from here. So just full power M+ comes out with Mythic of the first 2 raids. Then on the week of the 31st, we're getting March on Keldanas, and this is a 2-boss raid that has the hardest boss of the tier, is the end boss of March on Keldanas, and then the other boss, the second boss, the first boss, I guess, of the March on Keldanas, because 2-boss raid, right? The first boss of that raid is also going to be really hard. We don't know if that's going to be harder than the end boss of Voidspire, but my guess is that it'll be comparable difficulty, somewhere around there, and which one ends up being harder might depend a little bit on the tuning that lands here, and then also I suspect it'll be substantially harder than the Dream Rift raid single boss, which is like a mid-tier boss. And then Voidspire is also going to have its final Raid Finder wing released, so not something that is typically something that I interact with too much, but it is worth noting that this is an accelerated Raid Finder schedule where all 3 wings of that Voidspire raid come out over those 3 weeks, and then the last raids, Story Mode and Raid Finder, both come out on the week of April 7th. So very accelerated schedule on the Raid Finder. The Story Mode maybe still, you'll be a little bit grumpy to be a week later than, you know, normal and heroic of the respective boss or the respective raids for the Story Mode, but yeah, that'll be happening there as well. Notably, no Story Mode for the Dream Rift boss, so it's a little bit more of a side thing, and I guess Voidspire and March on Keldanas are kind of the main thrust of content. Now, if you are a AOTC or normal raid guild, my suspicion is this is going to feel pretty irrelevant, pretty similar to a regular tier for you. If anything, you might sort of, if you're a guild that clears heroic in the first or second week, you know, there's going to be a delay, a time gate on being able to actually do that final boss, that final raid. But if not, or even especially if you're a guild that kind of would prefer to take your time a little bit more, that's now being enforced by the last raid not opening up right away. If you are a mythic progression guild, in most cases, this will also feel pretty similar to, say, Nerebar Palace, where there was a heroic week as well. It's going to feel pretty different from the races or from the raids that don't have a heroic week, but the fact that there are the 3 raids versus just the 1, it's going to feel pretty similar to most cutting-edge guilds and most even non-cutting-edge mythic progression guilds, especially those guilds. It's going to be very much the same, because you could think of it like, imagine if Manaforge Omega, you couldn't fight Salhadar or Dimensius on the first week that Mythic was available. Almost every guild in the world would be like, okay, we weren't going to fight that boss anyways, right? 5 guilds in the world killed Forgeweaver or Raz. Should have been 6. 5 guilds in the world killed Forgeweaver or Raz on that first reset, and that is, you know, almost all guilds in the world were either not in Mythic or fighting the first, you know, 4 bosses, right? And then if you happened to be a Race to World First guild, on the other hand, it would be relevant that you couldn't fight Salhadar on the first reset. But yeah, for almost everybody else, it's going to be basically the exact same experience from you know, what is worth your time progressing. It's sort of like a raid where, you know, you would have the option to go into March on Keldanas before you've actually cleared the Voidspire, but my suspicion is that that's not going to make much sense for most guilds, because typically it makes sense to fight the easier bosses before the harder bosses, because they all give gear, and fighting the easier boss before the harder bosses is usually good. Depending on the tuning and the rewards of Dream Rift, that might have an interesting thing where, you know, if the Dream Rift boss is not especially difficultly tuned, you kind of basically always have the option of going there. But it's basically just like the raid has a slightly different path than usual, where you can sort of enter or skip to the bosses a little bit earlier, the later bosses, if you want to, which, you know, sometimes there are raids like that, and typically it doesn't change too much of what you're going to do. It will be very similar for most Mythic guilds. Now, for the Race to World First, on the other hand, there are some potential ramifications. So first of all, there was some speculation that depending on the release schedule, the Race to World First might not exist this tier, or might not be streamed in the same way. My suspicion is that with this schedule, we will still get a full broadcast event, not during the Heroic Week in all likelihood, although maybe guilds will experiment with something there. I know last Heroic Week tier, which was Nerebar Palace, there was 3 days of sort of an abridged schedule of content from Liquid. I think Echo also ran some Heroic Week content. So we may see some Heroic Week content, but it will be unlikely to be, a whole thing. But week of March 24th, the race will start in earnest. But for the Race to World First in particular, this release schedule does have some ramifications, which I will now explain some of the first ones that have jumped to mind for me. It's definitely worth noting that a lot of this does depend on the tuning, and also these are just what I've come up with. There are much smarter people that are paid to think about this a lot for the Race to World First Guild, so they may have much better ideas of what this all means, but just a couple things that jump out to me. So first of all, something that's kind of a freebie, Dream Rift Raid being on Mythic difficulty this week. So basically, okay, most races, you would never seriously consider running Mythic Splits. There have been some races where the words Mythic Splits have been put together in that order, but typically that's just like hey, it's the end of the week. We have a couple of characters that we might play next week. Let's do the first two bosses with in a split for them because they're not yet saved to Mythic, so we can generate a little bit of easy free loot for them. But something like a full split run of the raid where you take 10 mains and 10 alts into Mythic and you run that twice, that's what heroic splits look like, right? Although obviously to a much higher ratio of alts to mains than that. But you could do something like that for Mythic in theory. And the reason that it's typically not done is manifold, right? One is just that the race might end on the first week. And if you've saved half your characters and then the race ends, you're feeling really stupid, right? If you end up saving yourself to 2 splits, you're going to feel really dumb when that happens if the race ends that week. And so, oops, that's a mistake. And then on the second week, you can't do it either because you can't just split the first bosses and then combine for the later bosses because the Mythic reset works the way that it does. Both of those are changing with this release schedule. So, for instance, I'm going to start with some of just the more normal things that might happen. If this was just a normal raid that, had a normal difficulty curve, you could, on the second week, because the raid's going to go at least the second week, because the race is going to go to at least the second week, because not all the bosses are out on the first week. On the second week, you could split the Void Spire, and you might not even be able to kill the last 2 bosses on Void Spire in a split, but you could kill the first 4 bosses with your 2 splits, and you might think that's a better allocation of loot. It might be a better allocation of time as well. So that's something you could do on the second week. On even the first week, you could think about splitting Dream Rift as well, because you're not even going to get saved to the Dream Rift boss until you kill it. So you could progress the Dream Rift boss with your main characters, and then if you realize that it's easily killable, or not even easily killable, but killable, and might be killable with split characters, then you could do that. Because the other thing that's happening here is there is a hard cap on how much useful Mythic progression time you can do on week 1, which is not usually true, right? Even if you can't kill Salhadar on week 1, you can progress Salhadar a lot on week 1. Well, you can't even progress the last 2 bosses of the raid on week 1. So if you finish Void Spire and Dream Rift on week 1, and then you have 2 extra days, like, okay, do I want to farm M+, or would it have been smarter to have split the Dream Rift boss instead? Now, this might go even further than that, because you might actually be able to split Void Spire, and it might be even beneficial to split Void Spire on week 1. And again, maybe you can kill, again, a lot of this is boss tuning specific, but you might be able to run multiple splits of Void Spire, because when you think about the difference between the gear that a main character has and the gear that an alt character has, well, if you do enough normal and heroic splits, you can make a lot of pretty comparably powerful characters going into this second week here. And doing some splits on this week of the 24th of Mythic will make your characters more powerful. That might mean that then on the week of the 31st, you can actually split all 6 bosses of Void Spire, which means you might be able to generate a larger item level advantage over the competition by even potentially killing fewer bosses on the week of the 24th, but killing them on more characters. It's extremely... There's a big potential for some very cringe, unwatchable content for the first week, right? If especially if multiple teams decide to do this, the week of the 24th might be 4 days of, heroic splits, and then 3 days of, Mythic sort of semi-progression, but also we're doing it in a split. There's some incentive to delay your decision for as long as possible as well. But yeah, there's some weird possibilities that are created by this release schedule for sure for the Race to World First, all of which is predicated on the fact that these are guilds that would typically reach the penultimate boss. Even if they don't kill it, they'd reach the penultimate boss, and sometimes even the last boss in that first week, and that's off the table now. So yeah, that'll be fun. The Race to World First is going to have some very, very fun possibilities here, again, depending on the relative tuning of the bosses, the rewards as well. If you have a easy splittable boss, but it doesn't give particularly good, like the Dream Rift boss, for instance, you could think of, okay, if there was Maniforge Omega and that was the Soul Hunters, and you could just kill Soul Hunters as many times as you could successfully split it, it would be worth the investment of many, many hours to generate extra kills of Soul Hunters and get those extra boots on everybody, right? That boss had really good loot. If, on the other hand, it was, say, Fractalus that was the boss, that boss's rewards, they're still good. You probably would still do it because it had those the Void Glass weapons, so, you probably would, but maybe you wouldn't. And if it was like Forge Weaver or Raz, then you'd be like, okay, great. We don't have to do this week, and we can wait for Blizzard to nerf it next week, and we'll only do it if we have time at the end of all of our work in Voidspire, but we might instead decide to do splits of all the other bosses that were available in the Voidspire raid. So yeah, Mythic Split's definitely on the table, I guess, is the main takeaway here. How exactly they'll look, whether they'll be fun to watch, whether it happens in just the Dream Rift or just the Voidspire, whether it happens on the week of the 24th, or because the other thing is on the week of the 31st, the thing that this unlocks as well is you can split Voidspire and Dream Rift without griefing your lockout on March on Kel'Danas. So you can split the farm without griefing your progression lockout, right? And that's the other big reason why Mythic Splits don't happen when it's all in one raid, but they might this time around. So yeah, it should be a fun race. It's one of those things where even if this is super duper cringe, it's kind of cool if it happens once, right? Like if it's just this race, and it's just the Race to World First guilds that will be really seriously considering this. There might be some other cringe guilds in the top 50 or whatever that are looking at some form of doing Mythic Splits, but for almost all cases, it's going to make more sense for every cutting edge guild to progress boss 5 of Voidspire rather than try and split the Dream Rift boss. That's just a better use of your time if you have limited time, which the Race to World First guilds don't, right? So yeah, as long as it stays contained to top 3 to 10 guilds in the world, and really is only this tier, there's kind of not really that big of a fail case here. Like I think it'll be fun to watch, even from the perspective of just kind of like fun to watch the train wreck happening here. But yeah, that is what jumped out to me on reading this release schedule. Was at first I was like, okay, they're all kind of close together. We're not going to have the super drawn out 4-month long raid season that's just artificially time gated. But yeah, that was the second thing that jumped out to me for sure, was the potential value of Mythic Splits with this. Okay, that's enough talking about the Midnight Season 1 schedule. If you have any questions about this, I might break it out into its own video at some point, maybe closer to the raid coming out, with some better examples. And I need to look at the loot more as well from these bosses to also help figure out the value of it. But let's take a look at some of the other stuff that is going on. So we have the actual patch notes themselves. And again, we're not going to go over this with a fine comb like we did with a lot of the alpha updates. But here are the developers' notes. In this Midnight update, we're making several tuning changes across all healer specs. We've been looking at data from all forms of content and have noticed that healing burst and incidental healing has crept back up to a place that's higher than we'd like it to be. We've made changes to every healer spec to adjust the output of many of their spells. Many sources of burst healing or incidental/uncontrolled healing have been reduced, but we've also increased the value by several spammable healing spells. We're closely monitoring the situation, and we'll continue to adjust healer throughput as Midnight's beta test continues. So I guess let's wait until we look at a healer spec quickly and place the example of that. First, we have DK, though. So DK has some pretty minor changes here. Some of the stuff, some nerfs to exterminate rune cost, some things like Trollbane's Chains of Ice no longer dealing damage. This change there are a couple of other changes like this across these patch notes where it's basically like, look, these little utility things no longer come with damage, and some changes for blood as well, which again, just some general cleanup here, and same with Unholy. And then yeah, I guess for some reason we've got, I guess those were Sand Lane changes to Blood and Unholy, and then we have the actual spec changes that are hero talent agnostic here. A lot of small nerfs to different parts of different kits as well. Like the set bonus here for blood is getting cut basically in half, but also some chances for things to proc are going down. And these are I would say there's more nerfs than buffs across the board in the just numbers changes that are in this patch, but not a huge deal. My suspicion is that this is similar to the changes they're making to the healers, where it's just kind of across the board. There's a couple of things that they want to lower the baseline on a little bit, and that gives them some more space, hopefully, to do some fun stuff in the future. But one notable change I did want to highlight for Blood in particular is that Bloodshot, which is increased damage while you have Blood Shield, is no longer only physical. It's now all damage, but it's 8%, which is a much smaller number than the physical number used to be here, while Blood Shield is active. So that should hopefully be... I'm a little torn, because I always kind of hated the Bloodshot being as powerful as it was, and this is almost certainly going to be a damage nerf. Also, I guess helps equalize a little bit between Sandlane and Deathbringer, as they do have different amounts of physical versus non-physical damage between those two hero talent trees. But yeah, all damage by 8%. This is probably a low enough number where it won't feel as bad to, like, you know, basically whenever you were playing this talent, if your Blood Shield was ever down, you felt really bad about your damage. The good news was, especially for Sandlane, the button that does the most physical damage was also the button that gave you a Blood Shield, so there was some helpful synergy there where you wanted to press Death Strike, but you kind of felt like, oops, if I wait too long to press my Death Strike and my Blood Shield falls off, I'm griefing a little bit, so that's nice. We have some medium-sized changes coming in for Unholy as well. Actually, I guess a lot of these percent changes are just buffs, so maybe I spoke too soon when characterizing most of them as being nerfs. Then we also do have some small changes to some of the spells themselves. Some of the patch notes that I missed as well have also been... They're doing a lot of sort of cleaning up with Unholy, which I think is good, because this initially had a really cool fantasy for the Midnight version of Unholy that the actual gameplay behind it in the first build of the Lesser Ghouls and the Putrefying stuff did not make a lot of sense. So yeah, it seems like that work is continuing here. DH, couple of changes here as well. One that I wanted to highlight here is Thrill of the Fight is now, after consuming both enhancements, you increase the damage of your next Reaper's Glaive by 30% and gain 6% haste for 30 seconds, which I think is a much smaller increase than the old Thrill of the Fight, which was like a huge thing that maintaining the uptime of and getting it as early as possible was really crucial before. But yeah, this is a smaller thing there. Also, for the Felsguard / Void Scarred side of things, they've taken a big nerf bat to Demon Surge, the base damage, the damage per stack. But there is a nice little change to the behavior where it re-empowers Blade Dance and Chaos Strike if you demonic when you I-beam with meta already active, which is nice there. Okay, for Druid, we have a developer's note here for one of the Elun's chosen things, which I guess is, so they've removed Lunar Amplification and moved Stellar Command to where it used to be. So removing Lunar Amplification and moving Stellar Command also means that Lunar Calling will be included in all Elun's chosen builds. It's been a popular choice, and we're making the change. It makes the Starfire's role and balances rotation definitional for Elun's chosen. So basically, there's no longer going to be a choice node. It's going to be... where they're going to know that you always have this if you're playing Elun's Chosen because people liked it. So it's one of those things. There's a couple of these nodes in some of the hero talent trees where it's like, yeah, this is a choice node, but the fact that it's a choice node means they have to balance assuming you might or might not have it, or else just, what's the point of it being a choice node also? And if it is way better or way more fun, then either make it no longer way better or just bake it in. And that seems to be what they're doing here. Okay, yeah, we have some bigger changes coming in for balance as well. In addition to adjusting tuning of several abilities, these changes aim to reduce some of the more subtle complexities of Balance Druid. Whirling Stars and Potent Enchantments have been updated to make aligning balances various cooldowns more straightforward and consistent for both hero talents. AP generation has been reduced slightly to reduce the number of GCDs needed to cast Spenders, and the damage of Spenders has been increased to compensate. Yeah, so I guess AP generation has been reduced slightly. I assume this means to increase the number of GCDs needed to cast Spenders, which, yeah, I endorse this change. I think making your Spenders feel a little punchier. It can be a little bit weird because if your damage is really, if it's like 2 globals that don't do anything, and then 1 global that does a bunch of damage, and then 2 globals that don't do anything, and then 1 global that does a bunch of damage, sometimes that can feel kind of bad. I always felt that way when playing Diablo 4, especially on release, was that a lot of the builds, it was like, press 2 builders that don't do any damage, and then press 1 spender that, kills every mob, and it's like, okay, that playstyle. But I think that works a lot better in MMOs than in ARPGs, and I've always felt like whatever you have to do for the budgeting to make it so that when I press Star Surge, it's like, bang, Star Surge. That feels good. Sometimes that gets lost a little bit, especially when other interactions key into, your Wraths and your Starfires rather than your Star Surges. So I like that. Feral, we've got primarily ability and talent tuning. The new Panther's Guile also adds a single target option in Gate 2 that adds some rotational variety, and Panther's Guile has been redesigned to make it so when Shred or Moonfire generate combo points, they have a 25% chance to generate full combo points, which is kind of an outlaw roguey feeling effect, I would say, but moving that into Feral, so that seems kind of fun. Evoker, they've nerfed the personal and pet damage of all spells. Duplicate no longer increases Ebonmite's self-damage increase as well, and no longer snapshots, and they've nerfed the 2 set. So Og just getting some tuning down here. These are, I guess, the kind of changes I'm not going to usually highlight in this video, but yeah, it's worth noting that the earlier version of Og is one of the most reworky specs this expansion. If you missed it, they're making it so that you, instead of putting Ebonmite on specific people, you just Ebonmite all the DPS in your party or raid, but then Ebonmite is more powerful if it's hitting fewer people, which is nice. But yeah, this is one that I think the tuning is going to be very important to. They now have a lot less difficult of a job making it so that it is good but not OP, but it's still going to be, I think, a really hard job because there's less of a historical precedent for this type of playstyle, so it'll be harder for them to have a good baseline in their heads of what these numbers should be. Okay. We also have some preservation as part of a broader passive, reducing some cooldown-based healing. We are reducing preservation's healing capabilities with Marithra's Blessing and Temporal Anomaly. Life Force Mender was also significantly overperforming as a talent and is being redesigned as something that is easier to evaluate as a player. So it used to be that Living Flame and Fire Breath increased by 1 to 2% of your max HP, which was a large amount of increased healing on a small spell that you cast a lot, Living Flame. And now it says red spells deal 20% more damage and healing. And then Marithra's Blessing, yeah, this is getting nerfed by a lot, which I think was the thing where I think your reversion it didn't just give a DR, but it gave a, 4% of all damage you take gets healed instead on your targets with reversion. And now it's, 2% down from 4 because you have 2 points on that particular node there. But yeah, I'd say Prez is, it was in a really popular state in beta over the last couple of weeks. How much of that was due to playstyle versus power level relative to the other healers always can be tough to tell, right? Like if a healer is fun, is it fun because you're able to win more easily on it? Or is it because the core playstyle is fun? I suspect that it was some combination of that for Prez, and we'll be able to see with this build how much of it was the power level versus the playstyle just being really fun. Because yeah, this in particular is a pretty sizable and subtle, part of the power of the kit. Okay, Hunter. BM has one change, which is kill command damage reduced by 15%. But then we have a lot of dev notes here, which has BM Hunter's been performing stronger than intended between several bug fixes and the adjustments below. Okay, so I guess there's one adjustment, and then also, there are buffs to Dark Ranger BM. But yeah, I guess the other adjustments either didn't make this post or it's just the bug fixes, and then this one big, obviously kill command is a lot of your damage. But yeah, they're hoping to bring their damage into a better spot relative to other DPS specs. Most of these changes are around Wyvern's Cry buff from the Pack Leader hero talents. Okay, so yeah, I guess that's this part. These changes are intended to nerf BM, the Pack Leader changes here. So yeah, there we go. Okay. And then, of course, yeah, kill command base damage going down. But yeah, it looks like Wyvern's Cry is the big target here. Mage. So one of these changes was already in, just a Frostfire nerf. Spellslinger. Splinter Storm used many effects, damage instances, and auras to deliver what was ultimately a simple and very passive effect. Removing Augury Bounds' effect to Splinter Storm, since the significant boost in Splinter Gen and throughput impact feels more capstone-worthy. Augury Abounds has been redesigned to provide a new source of Splinter Gen that retains the bursty feel of Splinter Storm, and the clear casting / brain freeze proc chance increase is being added as a passive effect on Archmage's Wrath. Our goal with these changes is to eliminate the very fringe optimization potential around tracking Splinter Storm while also reducing the number of auras and damage events that Spellslinger introduces. I think this makes a lot of sense. Spellslinger, like the splinters being where all your damage, like being the damage from them, but then it was clear that they didn't really want you to do anything with them, but then you could, but it was always cringe. So yeah, this seems good. Okay, class changes for Mage, just the one here, which is a buff to overflowing energy. And then some arcane just buffs, looks like this time around. Fire, so this is a big one. Meteor's still underperforming, so we're giving it a bump up in damage and further increasing its single target and priority target effectiveness. The update to overflowing energy and Fireball's cast time reduction are intended to help Fireball more consistently and frequently generate hot streaks in between your combustion windows. And we're also reintroducing Scorch and Heat Shimmer with a focus on adding some more procs and gameplay in between your combustion windows. I think this is really important. This was definitely a spec that was in that category of specs that were missing something. And giving back Scorch, I think, is a big something for Fire. So Heat Shimmer has returned. While Combustion is not active, Ignite damage has a chance to make your next Scorch instant, deal double damage, and deal damage as though the target is below 30% health. And then Scorch is... So Scald has been updated to make Fireball still have that always crit targets below 30% health. And it now has, when hitting a target below 30% health, Fireball deals 50% increased damage and Scorch deals 250%. So Scorch, very low damage outside of Execute. Good damage still below that 30%. And then the Scorch passive has been removed as well. But yeah, this is really nice. I'm looking forward to this. And crucially, making it work this way as well, where the always crit, like the Scorch dealing way more damage below 30% health, rather than just being an always crit thing, helps make it so that you shouldn't be casting Scorch as your filler in Combustion, which I think is something they didn't want. And high mobility with high uptime of Combustion always being something that happened for Fire. It's basically because Fire was hypermobile during Execute and hypermobile during Combustion, because even if Scorch wasn't always optimal, or it actually was always optimal to cast over Fireball, I guess there's some danger that it might be again, because it does always crit, like both of them always crit, so, you know, unless Fireball does way more damage, you are going to get more pyros in your Combustion still. So maybe you will still be hypermobile during your Combustion, because maybe you will still be able to, or it might be correct to be casting Scorches over Fireballs. But the fact that it does the 250% increased damage on low health, the thing is that both Fireball and Scorch used to be a small enough chunk of your damage in Combustion that you would basically, you'd be fine with it doing 0 damage, right? The thing that was giving you was the hot streak. So yeah, I'm curious actually what the rotation will be here. I don't know enough about the current base numbers of this to know whether you could say take a damage loss to get the mobility and also the shorter cast time if it still has that. Fireball, I guess, is getting a shorter cast time here, so maybe that will be the thing that makes it so that it's still correct to be fireballing over scorching in Combustion. But yeah, this is something, talk to your local fire mage to find out whether you should be scorching in Combustion. Either way, you will be scorching below 30% health, and that will mean that you can get that mobility during Execute, which was always one of the sort of hidden OP parts of Fire Mage that made it so that even if Fire wasn't simming as well as the other Mage specs, it was often still the correct play in a lot of high-end content. It's just because it had the cheat death and the mobility, and especially the mobility and damage during Execute was really valuable and not something that the Sims valued. So yeah, some, maybe all of that coming back here, depending on whether you cast it during your Combustion outside of Execute. Frost, we're continuing to iterate on Frost's AoE and Cleave gameplay, alongside a significant update to Frost's capstone talents. We've received a lot of feedback that target swapping and debuff tracking can feel overwhelming in AoE, so we're taking a bigger swing at focusing Frost's freezing and shattering gameplay to your primary target. This involves removing a myriad of effects that applied freezing in AoE, while also adding an AoE damage hook for shatter. With these updates, the rate at which you apply freezing to your primary target should significantly outweigh your ability to apply freezing to other targets. A new iteration on Fractured Frost will intelligently shatter nearby freezing enemies, bringing target swapping and debuff tracking requirements down significantly. We're retaining a few ways to add freezing in AoE, but we'll monitor the impact it has on gameplay and make adjustments as necessary. Yeah, this is good. I think one of the exciting promises of the new redesign to Frost was that you'd get a fun AoE rotation. that hopefully doesn't involve a lot of target swapping, but hopefully does do some nice damage. So I think making it so you're shattering a primary target, but then that shatter is doing AoE damage is a good way to do this, rather than trying to be applying AoE freezing. And then even if you could AoE shatter, depending on the rates that these different things procced, if you sort of noted, it was kind of like AoE festering wounds, right? Where you could apply the festering wounds to a lot of targets, but then, you know, it was correct to swap to that one that had more festering wounds on it to be shattering off of it instead. And that was something that I think they definitely didn't intend for it to feel that way. So it's good that that is changing here. Monk, pretty small changes for the hero talents. Some changes to the Brewmaster Apex talent coming in as well, and a substantial nerf to Slicing Winds for Windwalker, which I think is going to stop that being a damage button that you press for damage, and especially with Hurricane's Vault as well going down. I'm a little torn by this. I mean, I think that a lot of Windwalker's feedback has been that Slicing Winds doesn't feel like a particularly fun part of our rotation, and I think there were maybe some other swings that Blizzard could try before basically saying, okay, it's not part of your damage rotation anymore, but this is definitely better than doing nothing, I think. I have a couple changes here to Paladin as well, although no developer's notes, which means no reading for me for this video. And then for Priest as well, a lot of changes coming in for Disc. A lot of these are the sort of healer changes as well, with incidentals getting lowered on some of the healing and increased to your direct healing, with abilities like Flash Heal going up as well. Evangelism, though, is getting nerfed there, for instance, as a side of that. Radiance as well, right? So you're getting Evangelism getting sort of a double hit here, where it's doing a less powerful Radiance at a lower effectiveness as well. Smite's damage going up, though, is actually, this is going to increase your Atonement healing, because, of course, that, directly scales that. Holy, again, we're seeing, Prayer of Mending reduced. This is the just free healing that bounces around randomly on people. But Prayer of Healing, Flash Heal being increased. So basically they want more of your healing to come from you clicking on somebody and healing them, and less of your healing to come from your Cosmic Ripples, your Prayer of Mendings, right? The sort of things that happen for free, the smart healing. My suspicion is that this philosophical moving in this direction is going to increase the skill check of some of these healers. The value of triaging the right people is going up, which I think it makes sense to do this, especially in a world where the interactions are going down in most of the healer kits, right? If the skill is no longer empowering your wild growths with the Soul of the Forest, right? And it's, then pressing a wild growth or pressing a Prayer of Mending should be less of how your healing happens, right? And more of it should be, okay, let me choose the right target for a Flash Heal here. Okay, Shadow, they are making some updates to its Insanity economy, which has gotten too high. They're reducing Insanity from primarily passive sources and reducing the damage to diversify the spec's damage sources better. My understanding is that the Shadow Priest, at least a couple weeks ago, the last I checked in on Shadow community feedback from lurking around in places, was that Shadow Priests were pretty negative about the way that the spec felt. And my suspicion is this isn't going to help with that, although I might have missed some changes between when I checked last and now that maybe did make things better. But yeah, my understanding is that aside from the Tentacle being a cool improvement over Shadow Crash, and I think that's kind of unanimously agreed upon, a lot of the other stuff has been received more negatively from the Shadow Priests. Rogue, we do have a nerf to Tails' Fate-Bound Coin, which, yeah, okay, always a 20% reduction. Its damage has not been further reduced in that value. Okay, so I guess there was a wrong patch note at some point here. I'm not sure if it was in these notes or in a previous week's ones. Yeah, not any other huge substantial changes there. New talent for sub, though, for... Cheap Shot makes a Shadow Striking clone as well, or Kidney Shot as well makes an Eviscerating clone. That's a cool effect. Getting a little bit of damage back on your CC. Yeah, when you invest in CCing instead. Kind of reminds me of old Internal Bleeding for Assassination, which was actually sometimes good enough that it was just a damage increase to be pressing Kidney on anything stunnable. Okay, for Shaman, we have... this one I like. Primordial Bond, now making it so that your Earth Ellie no longer taunts or generates threat, and instead gives you max HP. This is really nice because you can now have Earth Ellie be reliable rather than being something where you press it. Like in M+, sometimes you'd press Earth Ellie as a defensive for yourself. It would taunt, which was either neutral or even sometimes slightly a negative thing to happen. Your tank would get confused, or it would cause a mob to have a weird behavior with one of its abilities. That usually those are bugs, but like now that it has a pet as its primary target, it, the mob will randomly kills somebody with a tank buster that normally would, if a player was their primary target, it wouldn't do that. But yeah, this is a nice way to opt out of that now. And now your Earth Ellie can just, first of all, you'll never have to worry about it griefing a threat situation, but also you won't have to worry about it dying and then losing the max HP, which could then mean that you'd die. So that's really nice. I like that a lot. It does mean I think you basically will always want to do this in serious PvE content, because typically the taunt value of Earth Ellie is pretty low. It's a lot worse than trees at that usually. Sometimes you get some value out of it, but there's not a necrotic affix anymore that would really give you value on like letting your tank reset stacks with this. So yeah, I think you basically are always going to want to talent into this, because again, it's also now the only way to get the max health increase. So if you don't talent into this, you lose the extra defensive, which Shaman as a class typically needs that defensive compared to a lot of the other ones. For Ellie, Primal Ellie now only gives you direct control over your Primal Fire Ellie. It was all three. To prevent summoning a Primal Ellie, dismissing your currently active Primal Ellie. That's really big. That was also a really obnoxious thing when talenting it into Primal Ellie, was that if you Fire Ellie, you'd grief your Earth Ellie, or vice versa. Resto's getting just some of the sort of same effects things here, where the targeted healing, the intentional healing buttons are going up. And it looks like there's not even really that many things to nerf on the unintentional healing, Whispering Waves being the only one there, and then just a flat nerf across the board there too. Warlock, sizable set of changes here, including for Demonic Soul, which, yeah, this text seems pretty similar to me, but something about it might be different, or maybe they just changed some of the flavor wording there as well. For AF, they are adjusting Dark Glare. While pooling soul shards will still be valuable with this newer design, it deviates from the snapshot gameplay and should make pressing UA after summoning more worthwhile. We're moving some of the conditional power of Dark Glare's Eye Beam into its baseline power, so it stands as a powerful cooldown while keeping some skill expression in dot maintenance. So it's only going to deal 10% increased damage for every dot you have active on its current target, rather than 45%, but its baseline damage is going up by 80%. So it's a little bit less important to make sure that you have that, you have all the dots out, and it's also, I guess, a little bit less important to, because, okay, yeah, it increases the damage of Agony, Corruption, Wither, and UA by 20% while active as well, so, okay. Because you can have, the new UAs are, it's the old stackable UA, right, is the way that UA works now in the Midnight version of this. Okay, demo, a couple of changes there, a lot of numbers, a couple new talents as well. Destro, a couple of new talents, a couple of numbers changes. This is nice. This is a lot easier than reading all the patch notes. Although it's kind of harder as well, because I still want to read them all with my brain, but then I also want this video to only be an hour and not 7 hours. Warrior, couple of new changes. A new talent, actually, Stance Mastery. This one's cool. So your stances have additional effect. Battle Stance gives you that 3% crit. It's back. Berserker Stance gives you 3% attack speed. And D-Stance, this is the one, so those ones are kind of whatever, but D-Stance is a pretty cool one, which is when an attack deals 20% or more of your max health and damage, that damage is reduced by 15%. That's a chunky amount of damage reduction here, in particular for non-tank. I mean, obviously this will be big for tanks as well when you're getting really beat up by a super hard-hitting situation. But for non-tanks, for DPS warriors swapping into D-Stance for this, that is very powerful for, your effective health against one-shots. This is, I mean, obviously it requires you to press D-Stance, which a lot of warriors I know are allergic to that, but that's big there. For Fury, they are putting back in the Titans. So, there's a new passive that makes it so that you can transmog your two-handed weapons to use one-handed weapons. Fury is the iconic dual-wielding spec, and Titan's Grip provides a unique take on that fantasy. We also know that many Fury warriors want to have a different look, and we've had several iterations of single-minded Fury to enable that fantasy. With the advent of Transmog 2.0, we have the opportunity to allow players to use whichever weapon appearances they prefer for their fantasy without having to spend talent points or fight with loot spec rules. So, bang, there you go. Your two-handed weapons now get to look like one-handers. And this, I guess, means that, one-handers should no longer be on the Fury loot spec table as well, because now you don't actually loot them for that anymore. Although I guess if you really wanted the Mog, I guess you'd go Prot loot spec So that's a little weird, but it's nice to not randomly be getting, one-handers when Single Minded Fury was never good, right? It was always you were always griefing your damage to be playing it, even when they tried to make it less bad. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, almost everybody's going to be happy with them sort of giving up on trying to do anything more fancy than this and just actually letting us mog it instead. And then some prot changes as well. A lot of big damage increases to a lot of prot warrior abilities, but these are just beta numbers, right? Like these are the kind of, if there was a patch note that did this in a mid expansion patch, oh my goodness, that would be the biggest news ever. But here, this is par for the course. They've randomly made a bunch of stuff do half the damage it was supposed to in a beta build because that's something that happens in beta builds. Yeah, okay, that is it for the class changes. Some PvP changes, some other new UI and accessibility changes as well. Major defensive buffs will now appear as a large icon in the center of raid frames. Huge. This was one of the big weak auras that was like this. If you don't download this weak aura, you're griefing. And Blizzard, and then like when Blizzard's like, okay, we're gonna kill that. A lot of people were like, okay, well, this sucks because it's one of those power level things where it felt good to know that people had a defensive rolling. How much of the skill of WoW should be you being able to know intuitively when people are pressing wall versus if you could just see it on their raid frames versus downloading the thing that lets you see it on the raid frames. And I think having it just be the default behavior of the base UI, or at least an option in the base UI, is giving us the best of all worlds here. Some of the UI changes are features that we don't need anymore and can just be, they can just take them away. That's fine for a lot of them, although people will disagree on which ones fall into that category. But I think knowing when people's defensives are rolling is like 90+% of people are probably fine seeing that on raid frames, and that's good. Add the ability to set a custom color for health bars instead of default green or class colors. Cool. New bleed dispel indicator to raid frames. Yeah, these dispel indicators, we'll talk more about them in a bit, but somewhat controversial. Some ambient sounds for the Harroneer scene on the character creation or character select screen. Not super relevant because most people are mostly looking at their campfire, not their specific character select screens, although if you're going, sometimes you do, depending on your preference, I guess. Yeah, dungeon filter is now a flyout menu to accommodate long lists of dungeons. Art has been added for journeys in the adventure guide. New accessibility feature, combat audio alerts. Added support for announcing player and target spell casts. Settings include whether to announce them at start and end, format, minimum cast time, and throttle. Support for announcing when the player's target starts casting an interruptible spell and when the player's target is interrupted. And supports for reading your primary resource, percentage, format, and throttle. So most of this I expect will not be worth using. This is largely accessibility stuff, so if you need this for accessibility reasons, I think you'd want to turn these on. But my suspicion is like this is something where people will read this and be like, oh man, that's going to be really annoying. It's like, yeah, that is going to be really annoying. Don't turn it on, right? Like this is not, you don't need to have an audio alert when your target starts casting an interruptible spell. Weak auras could do that for years, and we didn't typically have that. We had weak auras that air horned us when a specific spell was casting or when a spell was targeting us, right? Those kind of things, and that's not coming back. But yeah, this will give you, if you want that functionality, if you really want it, I think typically it's going to be accessibility reasons that will turn this on. One potential exception to that, I think, is low mana. A low mana alert is probably something that is potentially useful for to have be an audio alert. That's basically something that a weak aura might have done for you that you can actually have without spamming yourself with a bunch of irrelevant information. So yeah, that is probably one worth turning on here, even if you're not seeking accessibility features. Damage meter's in now as well, including avoidable damage taken, which is nice. We got a nice elitism helper, functionality here coming in for that. I'm excited to see people disputing in the forums whether certain damage things should count as avoidable damage or not for that. And yeah, they've also removed some of the restrictions on player secondary resources, so add-ons can create custom displays. So if you were that feral druid that really needed the paw with your combo points, that's coming back, it looks like. So yeah, congrats. Okay. Some other, basically return of function for add-ons that has been in the areas that, add-on developers and Blizzard can agree add-ons can still have access to certain things. Okay. Rapid fire. Couple of Wowhead posts that are going to be fit into the end of this video because they're going in this video because I don't want to make 2 videos. We have, if you're interested, all the hidden appearances are available in Legion Remix. This might be of interest to you because there's actually an achievement for getting a hidden appearance for each class that gives you decor. So if you're a decor maximalist, then you're going to want to make sure that you have that for all of your specs. Log into a character of each class that you played during Legion to get the achievement. You actually need to log into the character that has it. So if there's a character that has it that you haven't logged into, log into that character to get the achievement. But me, for instance, I played all the characters during Legion, all the classes, and I'm missing Priest and Monk. So I will be probably making use of this to pick those up in Remix rather than, because I also need to farm some more bronze to buy all the stuff that I want from Remix as well. But yeah, crucially here as well, there are some turbo cringe hidden ones to acquire that are going to be less turbo cringe. So for instance, Disc Priest, they call it out. Did they call it out in this post? Yeah, Disc Priest and Ret Pally have long processes to obtain their hidden appearances, and you don't need to do them if you do it now on Remix. So definitely worth doing. And same with, Unholy DK. You no longer have to do all this ICC stuff. So yeah, these are really nice. These are all the specs that have changed how they're acquired, and it's all like buffs. They're all getting easier. Plus anything that has, order hall stuff, any of those kind of interactions are all basically going away. So that's really nice. Okay. This is also sort of Legion Remix, but also sort of everybody. There's just been a large nerf to the amount of experience that you need to go from 70 to 80, a total of about 80%, with it's a slightly bigger nerf to 79 to 80 than 70 to 71, but yeah, on average, a 78% nerf to the amount of experience that you need across these different levels. So that is really nice if you're interested in leveling characters either by Remix or by non-Remix. Yeah, either way, this will work. Then we have some Twitter discourse that turned into a Wowhead post as well. We have a new Healing Absorb texture on Midnight Beta, which is here definitely an interesting way to display a Healing Absorb rather than, I think a lot of us are used to the purpley Absorb Shield indicator. I'm not sure if that was a default or just maybe that's just what my raid frames did. I actually have no idea. But yeah, these are the new Healing Absorb textures. And brand new texture, yeah, it's plus signs indicating that it's a heal absorb. So if you don't know what this is, it's a bunch of the healer roll icons sort of stapled together with low opacity, making this. Yeah, okay, this is the old one. The old one is this sort of darkened texture. And then I guess my raid frames did a purple shield. So yeah, there you go. There's not seemed to be an option to switch between these. And yeah, my suspicion is that this new pattern is going to be generally unpopular because it does look kind of ugly. And also people are very resistant to change. So even there are people that would have liked this version more if this was the old version and then this is the new version. But I think that most people are either slightly, even sometimes unknowingly, or very change averse. So that's not helping. Plus, I think it's also ugly, but I don't know how much of that is my own aversion to new stuff coming through. But I think this one's just ugly. I don't know. I'm not sure. Either way, this sparked some fun discourse on Twitter where JB was PvPing people again in his replies about this. But I think that his basic point is like, yeah, this is the kind of thing where it's not just that this is a bad texture, which I think it is, and I think a lot of people would agree that it is, but it's the case that just 100 people are going to have 100 different ways that they want to display this information, and add-ons doing that gave us that, and that was one of the nice things about add-ons being as powerful as they were in old WoW. I think something like what Healing Absorb texture you have is something that there's no reason that the add-ons being able to do that is not something that contravenes Blizzard's new policy, so I think they definitely should do that. And they should provide a less ugly-looking default option than this. And if there are a couple of commonly used ways to do this that most people agree on one of 3 different ones, right? If 90% of people use one of 3 different ones and is their favorite way of doing that, then I think it would be good to have those be options in the base UI as well. But I think that's a medium-term, thing to add in. I think short-term, let add-ons do it, and also make the default one less ugly than that. Same sort of the out of range indicator. There's another sort of example of this where they added in a new out of range indicator, which was this eyeball thing. It's eyeball texture in addition to fading the frame. But yeah, that was pretty unpopular. Again, I think some change aversion there because people going in a lot of cases. I think the raid frame just being faded. Sometimes kind of hard to tell. So I do think an option for an indicator like this, kind of nice. Kind of nice to have the option, if maybe not that specific icon. And then there's also been some changes to the tinting of dispels again as well. And yeah, this one is one where you can disable it in the options, but I actually quite like having the option for a pretty loud display that somebody has something that you can dispel, because I think in fact, I think that should be the default, because a lot of people don't dispel in pugs, and a lot of the same people that don't dispel in pugs are people that are not going to change settings from default settings. So I think something that would help is making the default setting very loud when somebody does have a dispellable effect. Okay, we have the new Midnight Season 1 tier set names, which feature some bangers. Now, this used to be the domain largely of Skarzard. I don't know whether this was done before or after he left there, but whether either this is, if he did this, they're great. If he didn't do them, they're also great. And the baton has successfully been passed to somebody else, the WoW team, because in particular, I think the Warrior one is my winner here. I don't think any of this tops the Eulogy to a Dying Star, which was the priest one from Reforged Omega, but I like Rage of the Night Ender for Warrior. It's nice. It's got the, I think it was Edgar Allan Poe poem or something. God, if that's wrong, I'm going to look really stupid. But there's the Rage Against the Dying of the Light, and that Rage of the Night Ender evokes that for me. I think that's a cool name for a set bonus there to have. But the other ones as well that we have here are pretty sweet too. The Voidbreaker's Accordance I like as lot. The Livery of the Black Talent. I think from now on for the Evoker set bonuses, they should only display 20% of the letters and make us kind of guess at what the rest of it was supposed to be, because that's what they do with the appearances of the transmog. So I think it would make sense to do that with the words as well. So like it was like le, f, bl, lawn, and we just had to kind of guess what the whole idea was. I think that would make more sense for this. And then, yeah, some of the other ones, the Motley of the Grim Jest, and the Blind Oath's Burden. Those are pretty good as well. A lot of these, I like all of them. I'm not going to read all of them out. But yeah, I will note as well, we've got some of the names as well you can see in-game. I'm not going to read through all of them, but another thing that I liked was when they all had, it wasn't just like breastplate pauldrons, which this one does have breastplate pauldrons, but at least it also still has fists, tusks, and shosses, which they actually used a couple times now as well. But yeah, I like when they have at least a couple of whimsical names for the items themselves rather than just the full set. This is content that I know some people don't care as much about, but I have an appreciation for these things, and especially now that hopefully, I don't know if currently, but hopefully soon you can display these in your house. I've been so behind on doing any housing related stuff because housing came out like 2 days ago, but I've been all busy with this here in Brazil, which is where I currently am. If you've missed my last video, here at CCXP in Brazil, and actually currently in the Liquid Alienware training facility here in Sao Paulo. So very nice. As you can see, I've got the stuff behind me here. I've got my streamer pod that they've set up for me very, very kindly. Okay, we have a new Midnight mount as well that might increase all speeds. So it is the Duskbrute Harrier, which is a little weird because this does not strike you as a mount that should be a swimming oriented one. But yeah, this one is one of the rare. This is going to be the first one that is simultaneously increasing ground, flying, and swim speeds. Now, my take on this is a little mixed. Like, it's cool, but also it reminds me a little bit of, you remember when there was everybody used the Water Strider mount because it had functionality that the other ones didn't, which was being able to run on water. Now, swim speed isn't as big as that, but if you make a mount that's like kind of objectively strictly better than other ones, I think that it's not good. And so there are other mounts that have little effects, but oftentimes they are balanced to not be strict upgrades by having something like we can't skyride or we can't use mount equipment. But if there is a mount that can skyride, can use mount equipment, gives you a ground speed increase, gives you a flying speed increase, and gives you a swimming speed increase, and all of those are the maximum increase, which they typically are, then that mount is like a strictly correct choice to use. And I think that's bad. I would prefer if they kind of just gave most mounts the full power. And, like, oh, if this mount doesn't make sense to be good at swimming or whatever, like, okay, it can have not that, but, or if this mount doesn't make sense, obviously a lot of mounts aren't flying mounts. But yeah, I would prefer to just kind of have to sort of homogenize that power. And then you can maybe make some mounts that are turbo swimming mounts, but those should never be able to fly or something, right? Like those should be, especially that, or there should be at least something that makes it so that it's not correct to just only bind that one. And cause I'm an enjoyer of using, random favorite mount. So hopefully this doesn't disrupt that in a way where I feel like, because even if it's like, oh, I'm only, a tiny percentage of the time it's worse, it feels worse if you kind of know that you're griefing in any way. So that's my take on that one. Okay, here's a really cool thing coming in the Titan Reforged servers in China. So there is a event that they're running there where the guild that accumulates the highest number of points in this event will get to name their server for a month. And that, I think, is extremely cool. So yeah, you earn points for killing players of the other faction, max level players of the other faction, and you get bonus points as well. Oh, but you no longer receive bonus points after killing the same player more than 3 times within 3 days as well. So a little bit of an anti-win trade / griefing one particular player incentive there. Although I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised if people still try and win trade this thing. But we'll see. I guess we probably won't see. We probably won't get super accurate information on how this went down over here in the West. But this is super cool. And the guild first on each server's guild leaderboard will get to name their server. So, for example, if the guild For Azeroth ranks first on the Time Traveler 2 server, the server will be displayed as Time Traveler 2 For Azeroth. So I guess you don't get to pick a name, but it will have your guild will be on your server name. And it may be subject to character length and compliance requirements, which is good because I know there's at least one guild on these servers that has an obnoxiously long name. The name is literally like, we made our name as long as possible to be annoying on purpose, which I have a great deal of respect for. But yeah, this is super cool. This is an extremely cool reward. It reminds me a bit of Guild Wars 1, which is actually getting a remake, Reforged thing soon. But Guild Wars 1 had this thing in Guild Wars Factions, which was an expansion for that game. There was this like war between 2 factions, and there was this battle line that moved across the map. And your guild would be associated with one of the factions, and the guilds that earned the most like points towards their faction would get to have like within the sort of 20 towns that were in the war zone, if your faction controlled 10 of them, the top 10 guilds on your faction would each get to control one of the towns and sort of decreasing prestigiousness. So, if you were the 10th ranked guild, you'd have one of the sort of middle battleground ones that was sort of just a little outpost. But if you were the highest ranked one of your faction, you'd have the capital, and your guild would get to like access a special zone there, like a special part of the town, and shoot off fireworks and stuff there, I think, which... yeah, it was extremely cool. One of those very compelling rewards that I think, when you hear about it, you're like, that's really cool. And this is one like that for me, like getting to name your server. You're getting your guild's name on your server. Extremely cool. They should do that for first guild to kill end bosses in retail. That would be sweet. But yeah, this is just extremely cool. So wanted to call that out. And with this last control tab bringing us back to our first page, that means all the Wowhead windows I opened have now been talked about, which was the objective here. So hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.